Like, tell me what that moment was like for you. What was Diana like? She goes, oh, how sweet. I'll have to tell H about it.
Oh, God.
So already she's like levitating herself above this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Harry, it's H. It's my H.
Yep.
Like, I'll tell him that. We're separate over here. And by the way, presumably, isn't your husband watching this show and cheering you on?
Yeah, right.
Your big launch?
Right.
Like, you're
He's
going
not
to
doing
have
anything
to
else.
relay this to him?
Right. And going on to say the prince and the starlet, according to Vanity Fair, have become local villains in Montecito. Quoting someone as saying they are the most entitled, disingenuous people on the planet. They moved from England to get away from the scrutiny of the press, supposedly, and all they do is try to get in the press in the United States. So what does all this tell us? Except she didn't put eye makeup on. And she also is pretending like she's crying. And we did a zero in, like we zoomed in just to see there isn't a tear in sight. Dan, look at this. I invite the viewers to take a close-up look at this. Where's the tear?
Poor Meghan Markle still trying to convince us she's just a misunderstood duchess with a podcast, a Netflix deal, and a homemade jam empire. But Megyn Kelly's not sipping the royal Kool-Aid. She calls like she sees it fake tears, fake titles, and a whole lot of self-praise. Buckle up, this takedown gets messy.
It's within the reach of anybody. As she writes, like, whole wheat toast with estate honey, honey from her goddamn estate.
She's obsessed with her honey.
But she's obsessed that she's...
She traded in scripts for royal titles, but according to Megyn Kelly, Meghan Markle never stopped performing in one of the most searing takedowns. Yet Kelly didn't just call Meghan disingenuous. She accused her of turning her entire public image into a high-stakes audition reel. For global sympathy, the accusation Meghan Markle, once a cable TV actress, now plays her most ambitious role. To date, the perpetual victim Kellys. Sharpest fatigue zeroed in on a chilling rumor one that's been whispered in back. Channels are now resurfaced with renewed fire that Meghan once proudly admitted she could cry on command. And with that, Kelly didn't just raise an eyebrow, she drew a line. This isn't vulnerability. She said this is strategy. Megyn's Spotify podcast archetypes a show that promised to dismantle labels, but ended up, according to critics, serving as a masterclass in emotional theater. In one particularly striking segment, Megyn shares an unsettling tale about a fire breaking out in her infant son Archie's nursery. It's the kind of story that should clutch hearts worldwide. But the reaction wasn't the tidal wave of compassion she may have expected.
Which is, I'm going to show you how to make a happy, warm, loving home after I have successfully severed my husband's ties from his entire family, after I have successfully severed every single tie save my mother from my own family of origin.
Instead, skeptics labeled the moment as calculated pathos, a performance too polished, too perfectly timed to feel real. Cue the tears, one critic sneered in action to Megyn Kelly. This wasn't a moment of maternal trauma. It was Megyn's latest monologue. Kelly contends that Megyn's frequent bouts of teary-eyed storytelling, from Oprah's Garden to Netflix's polished documentaries, aren't cracks in the Duchess's emotional armor there. Deliberate plot points in her carefully curated narrative vulnerability. She implies isn't Megyn's truth, it's her brand. She's mastered the soft voice, the trembling lip, the misty eyes, Kelly said. But it's not about openness, it's about optics. And perhaps the most damning accusation that Megyn doesn't just tell stories, she weaponizes them. Heartbreak becomes headlines, empathy becomes an influence. Every anecdote from family estrangement to royal slights is another layer in the portrait she paints of herself, not as the villain the tabloids once portrayed, but as the misunderstood heroine of a modern tragedy. But if Meghan Markle is the actress still acting, the world remains her stage. And we, the audience, must decide whether we're watching a heartfelt confession or an Emmy-worthy performance.
When they're no longer part of the royal family, the royals don't talk to them. The king does not talk to his own son. None of the senior royals talk to these two. They are total pariahs in the family because the only currency they have is trashing the royal family and the monarchy. And every time they try and
For someone who claims to amplify women's voices, Meghan Markle sure seems to have only one voice on repeat. Her own Megyn Kelly doesn't mince words. In fact, one of her most relentless critiques of Meghan is centered on a personality trait that's hard to ignore once you see it: narcissism. And not just garden variety self-confidence, but the full-blown spotlight hogging. This is my world, you just live in it kind of narcissism that Kelly argues fuels Meghan's every public move. According to Kelly, the Duchess didn't create a podcast uplift or enlighten. It was a branded echo chamber dressed up in feminism, Spotify's archetypes, which launched with the promise of deconstructing harmful labels placed on women, quickly unraveled into something far more familiar: the Meghan Markle show, with guest stars occasionally allowed to speak. It wasn't long before critics noticed a pattern. Despite the lineup of high-profile women in the spotlight always managed to boomerang right back to Meghan. She'd tee up a question only to follow it with another anecdote about her childhood, her career, her struggles, her triumphs, her royal life, her miscarriage or rescue dog, her mental health journey, her media battles, you name it. If there was a thread of conversation, Meghan stitched herself right into the center. Kelly even called attention to the statistics, the overwhelming use of I, me, and my throughout the episodes. Not subtle, not accidental. Intentional. According to Kelly, an audio mirror Meghan couldn't stop admiring herself in, and the production. It wasn't just polished. It was practically dripping with theatrical flair, breathless narration, overwrought music, cinematic transitions. It felt more like a self-funded documentary about a misunderstood heroine than a podcast meant to highlight shared experiences. The message, Kelly argued, was clear,
which is, I'm going to show you how to make a happy, warm, loving home after I have successfully severed my husband's ties from his entire family, after I have successfully severed every single tie save my mother from my own family of origin.
This wasn't about archetypes. It was about the archetype of Meghan, the noble rebel, the trailblazer, the silenced woman, found her voice again and again and again. Even her so-called interviews were peppered with subtle self-praise. She name-dropped Serena, recounted texts from Beyoncé, reiterated her royal pain, only to pivot into stories of resilience. Her marriage glorious, her motherhood saintly, her career revolutionary. To Kelly, archetypes didn't just miss the mark. It proved the very accusation Meghan constantly runs from, that she's not misunderstood. She's just obsessed with being the main character. And if the entire podcast felt like one long Instagram caption read aloud by candlelight, that's because, as Kelly sees it, was never about changing the narrative for women. It was about preserving the one thing Meghan Markle refuses to let go of: the narrative about Meghan Markle. They came in with crownless heads held high, armed with big promises, bigger budgets, and a global curiosity that could have paved the way for a media empire. But according to Megyn Kelly, what Meghan Markle and Prince Harry delivered wasn't groundbreaking content. It was a masterclass in overhype and underperformance. Let's start with Spotify, the $20 million deal that was supposed to launch Meghan into podcast royalty. The platform invested heavily, hoping for intelligent conversations and cultural impact. What they got instead was a handful of glossy, ego-laced episodes of Archetypes, a show that began with promise and quickly derailed into an audio diary filled with vanity and recycled trauma. Kelly ripped into the failure with surgical precision, highlighting the overwhelming wave of disappointment that followed. Reviewers weren't just unimpressed, they were appalled. Descriptions like exhausting, self-indulgent, tone-deaf, and painful to endure didn't come from trolls. They came from mainstream outlets on both sides of the Atlantic, even some of Meghan's most loyal defenders were left scratching their heads, wondering where the substance had gone. And then came the final blow.
And going on to say, the prince and the starlet, according to Vanity Fair, have become local villains in Montecito. Quoting someone as saying, they are the most entitled, disingenuous people on the planet. They moved from England to get away from the scrutiny of the press, supposedly, and all they do is try to get in the press in the United States. So what does all this tell us?
Spotify pulled the plug quietly, unceremoniously. One of the most high-profile audio deals in recent memory ended with a fizzle, not a bang. But the Sussexes didn't stop there. They turned to Netflix, promising the inside story the world had been waiting for, a Harry and Meghan docu series wrapped in mystery and marketed as a deep, raw exploration of their side of the royal saga. For a brief moment, it worked. The numbers soared, but the content, according to Kelly, it was nothing short of a disaster wearing. Designer packaging, what audiences got wasn't insight. It was a whiny, overproduced vanity project dressed up as truth critics blasted the series for lacking authenticity, balance, or depth. It wasn't documentary. It was a brand extension, a painfully choreographed love letter to themselves, dripping with carefully selected photos, slow motion B-roll, and narratives that felt more like payback than perspective. Kelly called out for what she believed it really was, a one-sided smear campaign designed to torch the royal family, while painting Meghan and Harry as misunderstood martyrs trudging through a storm of injustice. And here's the ultimate irony. The one Kelly wouldn't let slide, Meghan and Harry, left royal life because they wanted privacy, but instead of disappearing quietly, they flooded the world with podcast documentaries, memoirs, and interviews that revealed more about their personal lives than the tabloids ever could have. Archetypes, and Harry and Meghan were meant to rebuild their reputations. The results did the opposite. They didn't cement credibility. They cracked it wide open. Megyn Kelly didn't see them as creators or truth tellers. She saw them as opportunists who overpromised, underdelivered, and cashed the checks anyway. Because in the end, the platforms pulled back, the audience moved on, and Meghan's media empire, according to critics, it collapsed under the weight of its own self-importance in the royal soap opera that is Meghan and Harry's post-palace life. Few moves stirred up more confusion and controversy than the naming of their daughter, Diana.
Except she didn't put eye makeup on. And she also is pretending that she's crying. And we did a zero in, like we zoomed in just to see. There isn't a tear in sight, Dan. Look at this. I invite the viewers to take a close-up look at this. Where's the tear?
On the surface, it had all the makings of a sweet, respectful homage, a touching nod to two women who shaped royal history, Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Diana. But for Megyn Kelly, that wasn't the story at all. She smelled something far less sentimental, something calculated. Kelly didn't hesitate to peel back the sugary layer of royal tribute to reveal what she dubbed a strategic PR maneuver her take the Sussexes were trying to have their royal cake and eat it too, publicly rejecting the monarchy, accusing the firm of racism and neglect, and yet naming their child after the matriarch of the very institution. They condemned. The contradiction was deafening, and the timing even worse. Diana's birth announcement came hot on the heels of two explosive events, the death of Prince Philip and the still scorching fallout from that Oprah Winfrey interview. According to Kelly, this wasn't just tone deaf, it was manipulative timing at its finest. The Sussexes were under fire. Public opinion was split. And what better way to soften the edges than to align themselves once again with the legacy of Queen Elizabeth and eternal affection for Princess Diana? But Kelly wasn't fooled, and she made sure her audience saw the cracks in the PR veneer. She questioned how Meghan and Harry could attack the monarchy's inner workings, claim emotional devastation at the hands of the institution, then turn around and use the Queen's deeply personal childhood nickname Lily as a branding tool for their next chapter, not to mention the irony of dragging Harry's royal lineage through the mud and then borrowing its most revered names for their newborn daughter. Kelly painted a picture with biting precision. This wasn't a tribute. It was a well-timed marketing campaign disguised as reverence, a move that screamed, see, we're still royal, still relevant, still connected to the crown. And perhaps that's what stung the most behind the filtered Instagram posts and softly lit interviews beneath the curated speeches and Netflix montages. Lies a version of Meghan Markle the public rarely sees. And if Megyn Kelly has anything to say about it, that version isn't just less flattering, it's downright disturbing. While Megyn has carefully cultivated an image of polished compassion and progressive grace whispers from the palace. Halls have painted a very different portrait, and Kelly She turned those whispers into a full-blown microphone. She zeroed in on a string of bombshell claims from former Kensington Palace staffers' allegations that exposed what they called a toxic, emotionally draining environment fueled by Meghan's allegedly cold, demanding, and authoritarian leadership style, far from the mental health advocate and feminist champion. She portrays publicly Meghan, according to these insiders' rule, with an iron grip. Behind closed-door staff members reportedly describe being left broken, traumatized, and marginalized after enduring her relentless micromanagement and allegedly impossible expectations.
And going on to say the prince and the starlet, according to Vanity Fair, have become local villains in Montecito. Quoting someone as saying they are the most entitled, disingenuous people on the planet. They moved from England to get away from the scrutiny of the press, supposedly, and all they do is try to get in the press in the United States. So what does all this tell us?
Meghan's royal title remains her most valuable currency, whether it's etched on book covers, whispered by hosts on red carpets, or tucked into podcast intros. One thing is clear: Meghan may have left the palace, but she never left the brand when Prince Harry dropped his bombshell memoir. Spare the royal rebel promised readers a raw, unfiltered peek behind palace walls. But according to Megyn Kelly and a growing wave of critics, it wasn't a heartfelt healing journey. It was a literary tantrum, a 400-page expose that read less like self-reflection and more like a long-winded vendetta marketed as a story of trauma growth and truth-telling. Spare instead detonated like a personal nuke on Harry's own reputation, from revealing deeply private family squabbles to naming royal relatives allegedly involved in racist conversations. The book didn't just burn bridges, it napalmed them. Kelly didn't mince words, she dubbed the memoir self sabotage in hardcover, a printed spiral of bitterness wrapped in a dust jacket of self-pity. Far from gaining sympathy, Harry's confessions left readers cringing, from odd tangents about frostbitten anatomy to accusations that seemed less noble than narcissistic. And Meghan, while her fingerprints weren't on the cover, many saw her influence in the narrative's tone, strategic, emotional, and meticulously edited for maximum outrage. It wasn't just Harry's voice echoing through those pages. It felt like a calculated move in their ongoing PR chess game. But if Spare was meant to win hearts, it did the opposite. Critics accused Harry of violating his own standards of privacy, exposing not only palace secrets, but deeply personal family traumas for public consumption. The line between truth-telling and oversharing blurred completely. To Kelly, the memoir confirmed what she'd long suspected: the Sussexes weren't interested in reconciliation. They were chasing relevancy at any cost, and Spare was the costliest move yet once seen, as the charming, cheeky prince of the people. Harry rebranded himself in Spare as a walking wound, unable or unwilling to rise above the past. In Kelly's eyes, he didn't reclaim his story, he weaponized it, and the damage permanent of all the controversies surrounding Meghan and Harry. Few struck a nerve like this one when the Sussexes were announced as recipients of the Pat Tillman Award for Service, an honor meant to celebrate true military sacrifice. The backlash was instant and brutal. To Megyn Kelly, this wasn't just poor judgment, it was an insult, a slap in the face to real veterans. She seethed, echoing the outrage rippling across both sides of the Atlantic.
Which is, I'm going to show you how to make a happy, warm, loving home after I have successfully severed my husband's ties from his entire family, after I have successfully severed every single tie save my mother from my own family of origin.
The award, named after Pat Tillman, an NFL player who gave up fame and fortune to serve his country and tragically died in combat, was never intended for media darlings with glossy PR campaigns. It was meant for warriors, not woke warriors. Kelly argued that no amount of philanthropy, photo ops, or red carpet speeches could equate to the raw sacrifice made by those who serve in silence. In her words, Meghan and Harry's acceptance of the award felt less like recognition and more like a Hollywood hijack of Military valor in the end, Kelly's verdict was cutting. They'd taken something sacred and made it self-serving. The Sussexes may have started with good intentions, but somewhere along the way the mission blurred, and the veterans became extras in their own story in the glossy, hyper-curated world of Meghan Markle nothing. It is left to chance, at least as the fiery take Meghan, Kelly won't stop hammering home, according to Kelly, Meghan isn't just a public figure, she's a product, and everything she touches is less about authenticity and more about the business of brand building. Forget raw vulnerability or unfiltered moments. Kelly claims there's a carefully constructed machine running behind Meghan's every public move, a PR engine so fine-tuned it could rival the Buckingham Palace press office. She once railed against, from her headline-grabbing interviews to her signature breathy narration on Spotify's Archetypes, Kelly argues that Meghan's mission isn't connection, it's control over the narrative, control over her image, control over how the world sees her, and if it means shedding a few perfectly timed tears on camera. So be it. In Kelly's view, the Netflix docu-series wasn't a memoir, it was a cinematic redemption arc. The podcast wasn't a dialogue. It was a soft-focused monologue. The children's books, the charitable ventures, the media appearances, strategic branding tools cloaked in the language of empowerment and empathy. And let's not forget the wardrobe, every pastel blouse, every tasteful pearl earring, every messy bun at just the right angle. To Kelly, it's all part of a larger campaign. Meghan Markle, the brand, not Meghan Markle, the woman. But what's the brand selling? It's selling the image of a wounded warrior princess, a woman who escaped the shackles of royalty only to be wounded by ruthless media, a cold family, and a misunderstanding by the public. She's selling trauma chic package with motivational sound bites, feminist hashtags, and luxury deals. The irony, the more Meghan leans into her narrative of being misunderstood, the less the public seems to buy it. Even fans have begun to wonder, is this really who she is, or who her team wants us to believe she is? Kelly calls it curated vulnerability, those soft-spoken podcast confessions and teary-eyed interviews that feel a little too rehearsed, a little too cinematic. There's no grit, no awkwardness, no unscripted chaos, just the sheen of someone who knows the camera is always watching. What was once a fairy tale now reads like a calculated case study in modern PR warfare, and the goal reinvention to recast Meghan as a 21st century icon of strength, struggle, and self-reinvention, a woman with royal mystique, but Hollywood relatability, a rebel duchess in Dior. But Kelly and many others aren't fooled. In her words, Meghan isn't trying to be known, she's trying to be admired, not understood, but adored. And when you strip away the polished visuals and crafted sound bites, you're not left with a person, you're left with a pitch. Because in the end, Kelly argues Meghan isn't just playing a role, she's running a business. And the product she's selling is herself. Just when you thought the Meghan Markle saga couldn't get any more tangled, Megyn Kelly threw in a curveball that cut deep plagiarism accusations surrounding Meghan's much-touted children's book, The Bench. While mainstream headlines barely whisper about it, the whispers Kelly amplified screamed loud enough to make even Meghan's fiercest offenders squirm. Critics pointed out something uncomfortable. The book's heartfelt verses and tender illustrations bore eerily familiar echoes of other published works, too close for comfort. Some said a case of creative deja vu, or worse, straight-up copying. For Kelly, this wasn't some innocent coincidence or an isolated slip. No, it was a glaring example of a troubling pattern, Meghan's tendency to repackage and rebrand other people's stories as if they were her own personal treasures. The Duchess as copycat. It was an allegation that stung far beyond children's literature. This episode neatly fits into Kelly's larger thesis. Meghan's story isn't just about reinvention. It's about appropriation, taking royal traditions and public goodwill, wrapping them in a shiny new Meghan Markle label, and selling them back to the world with her signature twist, a brand built on borrowed glories and recycled narratives. What's worse, Kelly argued, is the symbolism of the timing. Timing. The Bench wasn't just a book. It was supposed to be a heartfelt gift from Meghan to her son, a window into her new life as a mother. Instead, the allegations painted a portrait of a woman who would rather borrow others' words and forge her own in this telling Meghan becomes less the groundbreaking Duchess and more the queen of the copycats clutching borrowed lines and familiar tropes to keep her brand afloat, and while some dismiss the claims as petty nitpicking to Kelly and a growing chorus of critics, it was another brick in the wall of Meghan's carefully constructed public facade. In short, if you thought Meghan's royal exit was about authenticity and new beginnings, Kelly's claim suggests it's been just the opposite recycled act in a long-running show with Meghan playing the starring role in her own remix of royalty. Megyn Kelly's takedown of Meghan Markle was more than a celebrity feud, it was an unflinching character assassination. She painted Meghan as an actress who never left the stage, a narcissist obsessed with self-image and a manipulator, using tears, trauma, and titles to keep herself in the spotlight. From fake tears and vanity projects to royal hypocrisy, plagiarism, and toxic workplace behavior, Kelly left no stone unturned in her comprehensive dismantling of the Duchess of Sussex. For those already skeptical of Meghan's intentions, Kelly's podcast felt like validation for others it raised. Serious questions about the line between authenticity and ambition, vulnerability and manipulation. Either way, one thing is undeniable: Meghan Markle's brand has been bruised, and Megyn Kelly isn't the only one calling out the cracks, fake tears, failed shows, and a fairy tale falling apart. Megyn Kelly didn't just criticize Meghan Markle, she exposed the strategy behind the sympathy. If Meghan's still playing a long game of royal fame, she just took a massive PR hit. The crown may be gone, but the drama, oh, it's just getting started.